Living with someone for 25 years, you'd think you'd know everything there is to know about them, but you could be entirely wrong. I interviewed my mother, Leslie Anderson, about her life as a child and her proud accomplishments as an adult. The fourth of 5 children born to Raymond and Muriel Morris, my mother was often overlooked and underestimated. But as she grew up, she proved to everyone that she is a force to be reckoned with. But learning about my mother as a child was an entirely new experience.
Hello and welcome to Coming to New England. My name is Alyssa Anderson and my guest today is my mother. Thank you for being here. What is your full name?
Leslie Anderson.
And when and where were you born?
June 26th, 1961 in Fall River, Mass., but I'm from Warren, Rhode Island.
How did your family come to live in Warren?
Our family had been in Warren for many generations. In fact, my mother's grandfather was a contractor and built many, many houses in the east end of Warren. So my grandmother, who was born in 1907, moved in when she was 6 months old to our original homestead, and my mother, who is 85, still lives there.
What was the house like when you were growing up?
Well, actually, when it was originally built, it was a one family, and over the course of many years became a multifamily. It was divided and rebuilt so that it became actually by then a 3-family. My grandmother lived in a couple of rooms upstairs, and we had only 4 rooms, and then there were 2 rooms downstairs and 2 rooms upstairs. That was a 3rd apartment. So there were a lot of people living in one house, 11 actually, in what had been a one family.
Do you remember anything about any of the tenants?
We had quite a few through my lifetime. Actually, we until I was about 11 or 12. I remember a young couple with a baby, and I used to go over and babysit because I was younger. Those are the folks that I remember the best.
But in 1973, a massive fire tore through the family home, destroying everything in its wake and putting my entire family plus the tenants out on the street. Though nobody was harmed, the damage seemed insurmountable. As a result of the kindness of parish priest Father Emile Robert, the family lived across the street, moving into the rectory of St. Jean the Baptist Church for 7 months while the house was rebuilt. But that never deterred the Morris family from being who they are.
Can you describe the personalities of your family members?
Oh, they're all pretty gregarious and loud. There were 5 of us, 5 children, my parents and my grandmother, that we all grew up in that one house. And so to get what you needed, you had to be pretty loud. Everybody's got a pretty decent sense of humor. So, you know, everybody's always trying to one-up the other. And that's still true today.
Describe a typical family dinner.
Loud. Very loud. A lot of arms reaching across the table. 5 o'clock, dinner was on the table. Very traditional. My father was military, and every night when he came home, dinner was on the table, and all the kids were sitting around the table, and it was meat and mashed potatoes and whatever you could get your hands on.
But you weren't a big fan of those mashed potatoes, were you?
Oh, no, I don't like mashed potatoes, no. No.
What were your favorite foods?
Spaghetti.
Grandma makes good spaghetti.
My mother grew up in the late 60s and into the 70s. Her life was shaped mostly by her grandmother, with whom she spent most of her free time.
Who is your oldest relative and what can you remember about them?
My grandmother, she just died about 10 years ago. She lived till she was nearly 100. I spent most of my childhood with her, in her company, visiting her contemporaries.
Did you have any family chores? What were they and which one was your least favorite?
We all had chores. My mother was very fussy about the house, and every day when I came home from school, I had to vacuum the den and the living room, sweep the kitchen, and do a little polishing in those major areas. We made our beds every day before we left the house. We all had our responsibilities that we had to do. And then doing the dishes at the end of dinner. I always had to dry, which I really hated. My sister always got to wash, but what are you going to do? She was older.
As a future educator, one might expect that she would have had great success in school from an early age, but something important really held her back.
What was school like for you as a child? What were your best and worst subjects?
I didn't really like school at all. In my elementary years, I went to a different school pretty much every year until I hit junior high. I didn't realize it then, but by the time I was 10 or 11, they discovered that I had a very significant hearing loss. And so learning to read was very, very difficult for me. I always loved math, and I did well in math, and I figured out later it was because it was visual and I could see what was happening. And then when I was 10 or 11, I had surgery which restored the bulk of my hearing. And then it took a long time for me to catch up with reading and making sure that, I understood everything that was going on. But being the fourth of 5 children, I don't think my mother noticed that I was sitting on top of the TV and really couldn't hear what was going on. And we were all loud to begin with. So some of the telltale signs necessarily would not have been so obvious to her. So that was a struggle in my elementary years. And then when I went to junior high, I went to a private all-girl Catholic school in town, and I stayed there from 7th through 12th, and finally found that there were enjoyable things about school, and made some friends, and so it was much better thereafter. Math was always something that I really liked, and foreign language.
Growing up, as the decades shifted, fads and trends were always changing.
Do you remember any fads from your youth, popular hairstyles or clothes?
Geez, my mother always had a beehive hairdo, big bell bottoms, things that, peasant shirts. My father wouldn't allow us to wear them because they looked like maternity tops, and he didn't want his teenage daughters looking like, that was a possibility. So they weren't allowed. My brothers weren't allowed to wear jeans to school. Jeans became the thing. We weren't allowed to actually wear those. So saddle shoes were also really popular.
Growing up around my mother, I learned to love music from her era. It must be hereditary because she listened to her grandmother's music as well.
What were your favorite songs and music?
I have a pretty eclectic view of music. As I said, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, and she was a fan of Lawrence Welk, so I did know the old music, so from the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, and really did like that. But from the contemporary music, I was particularly drawn to those which would have been considered more folksy, like Linda Ronstadt, Harry Chapin, and I loved Elton John. But then I also liked The Fifth Dimension. It was really eclectic. Grassroots was another of my favorites. So I really have a wide variety of music likes.
What was your religion growing up, and what church did you attend?
I was born into a Roman Catholic family, and we attended St. Jean the Baptist in Warren, and we lived right across the street from the church, literally right across the street. So you could sit on our front porch, and in the summer the doors would be open, and you could see directly through the church to the altar if you sat on our front porch. We were very involved. My sister was the organist at that church at 12 years old, and so I was probably 8 or 9 at the time, and sang in the choir, and went on to actually lead the choir at a little bit later in life, and became an organist myself, and also play for a church right now.
Can you tell me how your faith has impacted your life as a whole?
Well, I think that without that, life in its difficult moments would have been that much more difficult to manage. Life isn't always friendly. Life isn't always easy. But if you have that steadfast belief in something beyond yourself, it enables you to kind of get through and over the difficult times.
My mother had a small group of friends growing up. They were all close, but she's still extremely close with her best friend, Jessica.
Who were your friends growing up?
Well, as I said, early elementary, I did a lot of moving around, and so I didn't have, some kind of constant friends. But when I moved to middle school, my best friend was Jessica, and she lived in Tawisset, which is a little bit of a county community in Warren, and it was all farmland. And we spent not only our winters and our summers is right on the bay, so we would sail in the summer and snowmobile in the winter through blueberry patches, along stone walls. It's a beautiful area in Warren, so we spent a lot of time out and about having a lot of fun.
Though she and Jessica were close, the true mark of friendship is what she did for her best friend, Paula.
How did you find out you were going to be a parent?
I have a little bit of an unusual story in becoming a parent. When I was 27 years old, my very best friend had been married and became pregnant in the course of our marriage, and the time came for her to deliver her daughter, and in a very rare happenstance, she died just after the delivery of her daughter. Prior to the delivery of her daughter, she had asked that I make sure that the baby was taken care of. And in time, I did come to adopt that little girl, who is now 30 years old and well accomplished, and I brought her up.
Through an act of pure goodness and selflessness, my mother raised that child, my older sister Michaela, as her own daughter.
Your proudest moment as a parent?
I can't identify a particular moment, but I would say that my proudest moment as a parent is ever evolving, because I have been a single parent for 25 years, and both of my daughters are happy and well accomplished, and I know that they learned good things and put those things into practice in life, and neither one of them ever got into trouble that I know of, knock on wood. And I feel that that's a big accomplishment. I never wanted my children to become a statistic of single parenthood.
How is the world different from what it was like when you were a child?
Life was such that, you could leave the house at, right after breakfast. We knew it was noon because the fire station whistle would blow, go home for lunch, and then it was come back when the street lights came on. That was actually true. The world is different in that I think it's so much more fast moving. Our access to information is almost sometimes too quick. Our inability or unwillingness almost to communicate face to face is something I think that today's youth and young adults are going to miss out on. It's the fast pace of things that we learn, things that we have to do, and the stressors are significantly different than what they were when I was a kid.
What world events had the most impact when you were growing up? Did any of them affect your family personally?
Well, I would say the Vietnam War, the Cold War, all of those things. Could I say that they particularly impacted me? Not necessarily, but there was the knowledge of this difficulty around the world that was happening.
How would you define the American dream?
I would define the American dream in that being satisfied happy and secure within our own households, within our own family, and being able to share that with others. Feeling secure, I do work, but feeling secure in that and being able to provide for my family, I would define that as the American dream. Nothing in life is 100% guaranteed, but just feeling a certain amount of security and safe and happy in my home with my family and fulfilled in my job is important.
As the Director of Pupil Personnel Services for Bristol and Warren, she's won several accolades, including Special Education Director of the Year and a national award from the Council for Exceptional Children, Outstanding Educator of the Year. She is changing the face of education as we know it today. My mother is my hero. She raised my sister and I alone, but gave us the greatest life imaginable. She's brilliant, hardworking, hilarious, and the best mom in the world.